For over a century, Babe Ruth held the top spot in the conversation of the greatest baseball players to ever walk the face of God's green earth. And for a very good reason. The man swung a bat like a wrecking ball, sent pitchers into existential crisis. He was a great pitcher too, and he put up numbers so absurd that they seemed untouchable. And for the longest time, they were. That is, until a kid from Japan arrived and started doing everything Ruth was worshipped for. Only better.
2, Ohtani sends one in the air, the other way, back it goes, gone! One-of-a-kind player, one-of-a-kind season. Shohei Ohtani starts the 50-50 club.
Incredible.
It's this ball hard, way back to right field. Soto doesn't even move. Ohtani has homered in the All-Star game.
Now, in less than 7 years of joining the MLB, Shohei Ohtani has shattered records, defied logic, and did what no one else thought was possible.
Ohtani, right field, forget about it. 473 feet for Shohei Ohtani.
He made the greatest baseball player of all time look like second place, and he did all of that even after 2 Tommy John surgeries that almost ended his career. This is the story of how a Japanese kid became the best player in baseball history.
I don't know if there are any superlatives left to describe accurately.
So when Ohtani hit free agency after the 2023 season, every team in the baseball world wanted him. But the Dodgers, they were going to let this unicorn slip away. They saw their future in him, their ticket to dominance for the next decade, that next step. And they put their money where their mouth was, handing Ohtani the biggest contract in professional sports history at the time, $700 million over 10 years.
Breaking news from Major League Baseball, where Shohei Ohtani is signing with the Los Angeles Dodgers.
$700 million. Ohtani has tried to control the narrative around his free agency.
And let's just say the return on investment, that was instant.
Designated hitter, number 17, Shohei Ohtani.
In his first season with the Dodgers, Ohtani pulled off something so absurd, it felt unreal. He became the first player in history to join the 50-50 club. He smashed 54 home runs and stole 59 bases.
On a 1-2, Ohtani sends one in the air. The other way. Back it goes. Shohei Ohtani starts the 50-50 club.
But not only that, he set the record for the most games in a season with both a homer and a stolen base, 16 times. And just for good measure, he led the league in total bases with 411. Making him the first player in over 2 decades to cross the 400 mark. Of course, with numbers like that, the National League MVP award, that's a no-brainer. And when he won, he even made more history, becoming the first player to ever be named MVP in both the American and National Leagues. But he wasn't just putting up wild individual stats, he was leading the Dodgers to the promised land. And when the dust settled, LA raised the World Series trophy once again, and Ohtani was at the heart of it all.
Let's talk to Dave Roberts, huh?
But Ohtani's value goes far beyond the field. The man's a walking, talking economic boom. His global appeal turned the Dodgers into an unstoppable money-printing machine. Ticket sales soared, merchandise sales exploded, and sponsorship deals flooded in. In fact, reports say that he made the Dodgers an extra $20 million in his first month alone. Off the field. Yeah, bottom line is Shohei Ohtani's the kind of talent that comes around once in a lifetime. Since the moment he stepped into the MLB, he's been proving that he's just built different. And if his trajectory is anything to go by, 2025 is shaping up to be his most mind-blowing season yet. Or at least that's what we think. Let us know what you think in the comments below.